New York Times, really interesting story about how the Russian army is almost certainly in eastern Ukraine, and they have the pictures to prove it. So first of all, they explain what the Russians do when they go into areas like Crimea and now eastern Ukraine. They employ a tactic called maskirovka. That means disguised warfare, but I rather like the Russian name instead. So first of all, the New York Times explains it's hard to fathom, and this is quoting General Philip Breedlove, who was NATO's top military commander at one point. It's hard to fathom that groups of armed men en masse suddenly sprang forward from the population in eastern Ukraine and systematically began to occupy government facilities. Now, I love that quote from the general because it absolutely is overwhelming logic. Now, we're going to show it to you anyway. You're going to see the pictures for yourself, but think about it. Like a bunch of guys who had very little power, the pro-Russian local bumpkins there, all of a sudden have like an army of well-equipped forces that appear out of nowhere, that are incredibly well organized, and similar armies appear in 10 different Ukrainian cities. You would have to be logically challenged to believe that that was some sort of militia that sprung up out of nowhere and is not actually Russian forces employing maskirovka. Okay, it most certainly is. But as the New York Times explains, some of the men photographed in Ukraine have been identified in other photos, clearly taken among Russian troops in other settings. So let's show you some of those photos. So now this is back in 2008 in Georgia. You see the Special Forces patch there that you will see in other pictures as well. So some of these pictures are of the same gentleman or the same equipment, the same insignias from Russia, Ukraine, Crimea, Georgia, and you begin to see all the same guys and the same equipment. Okay, let's pause there for a second. You think militia guys showed up with that kind of helmet on? Where in the world did they get that? Where did they get all the great weaponry? Where did they get all the things that are on their belt? Come on, man, if you think, you know what Putin calls these guys? Little green men. And by the way, Putin's great in being the Tywin Lannister of our seven kingdoms, okay? Here, the United States, the seven continents, perhaps. Because as Tywin Lannister did in the last Game of Thrones episode, it's not that big a spoiler, everybody calm down, okay? He looked the Dornish prince in the eye and said, "No, I did not kill your sister," while his eyes were telling you, "Of course I killed your sister, don't be ridiculous." And Putin, in his last 4-hour televised show that he did in Russia, said, "Oh yes, those little green men, they were our soldiers on Crimea. The same exact looking guys in eastern Ukraine? No, they are not ours." In reality, of course, what he was saying is,
I has it.
Now, another guy has shown up, which is really interesting. It's Igor Ivanovich Strelkov. Who's this gentleman? Well, he is said to have a long resume of undercover service with the main intelligence directorate of the Russian General Staff, most recently in Crimea in February and March, and now in and around the eastern Ukrainian city of Sloyansk. So, now, the Ukrainian intelligence officials tell us that he's there. The Russians deny it in what is a hilarious statement. The Kremlin insists that Russian forces are in no way involved and that Mr. Strelkov does not even exist. At least not as Russian operatives sent to Ukraine with orders to stir up trouble. He's looking at you in the eye and saying, "Of course I killed your sister." No, that man does not even exist. Oh, fascinating. Okay, so in eastern Ukraine, these guys showing up with mass and all this equipment are backing guys who, like I said earlier, had very little political power and seemed to have no troops whatsoever before the Russians arrived. And every once in a while, they will let their mass slip. Some of the Russian forces will intimate that they are in fact Russian to send out a message, hey, don't mess with us. Okay, now, one of them made that very explicit. I'm going to share that with you at the end there because it's a frightening message. But basically to say, if you fire at us, oh, we're going to come at you pretty seriously. And in fact, one gunman initially said he was from Russia, and then he switched it to, no, I'm from New Russia. That's the words that they are using to describe eastern Ukraine. That does not bode well for Ukraine, sovereignty, or peace. Now, Some of their tactics, as the New York Times explains, is find someone with a Ukrainian accent who can give an interview to Russian television channel. So it's Russian troops, but you find someone with a Ukrainian accent and you put them out there like, what, it's the Ukrainians. We're just trying to help the locals here. I don't know what you're talking about. It was very important, he added, to say on air, and this is the major propaganda guy instructing what we believe is Strelkov. It's very important, he added, to say on air that all pro-Russian insurgents want is federalization or constitutional changes to give eastern Ukraine more autonomy. Now, I love that description because it shows you exactly how they come in, infiltrate, and then take over, and then pretend to be pro-democracy. Oh, we just want federalization. We just want more autonomy for the good people in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, it's the Russian troops who are setting that up so they can annex it later, as they did with Crimea. This is not speculation. We already saw them doing it, exactly this playbook, in Crimea. If you think they're not going to do it in Ukraine, you're not paying attention. Now, military analysts say the Russian tactics show a disturbing amount of finesse that speak to long-term planning. That's another thing that sent a chill down my spine. This is not like, oh, I can't believe what happened with Yanukovych. I guess we should respond. I guess we should do this. And it's a reaction to, no. They'd been planning this for a long time. Oh boy, that does not bode well. And finally, that scary quote from the gunman I told you about earlier. He said, if the Ukrainians respond with force, we have to stand for only 24 hours to tend the fire. And after that, 1 million-man army will be here. So that's how this works. You go in, you agitate, you take over, and if they dare respond, you send in a 1 million-man army saying, oh, we're just here to help and protect the locals who are just looking for more autonomy. Eastern Ukraine, it was nice knowing you.